Test.
We'll get started in just a moment. If you could please silence your phones. And we have a brief announcement regarding translation services.
Good evening. We will be having some simultaneous interpretations for those who need it. Muy buenas noches. Vamos a tener servicio de interpretación para aquellos que lo necesiten. Estamos allá atrás.
Welcome and good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for the community meeting. Thank you, Pastor Bishop and LifeQuest Urban Outreach for hosting. I'd also like to thank Commissioners Knight and Moody for their attendance. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to provide information and provide an opportunity to ask questions and receive responses to questions. Specifically, regarding the City of Grand Rapids Public Safety Small Unmanned Aerial System Program, drones. Brandon Davis will be providing information and responding to questions regarding the city surveillance policy. Chief Winstrom will be providing information and responding to questions regarding use or operating procedures. My name is Jennifer Van Horsen with the City of Grand Rapids. I'll be providing an agenda overview tonight as well as moderating the Q&A portion. We can pull up the agenda. Oh, Pastor Bishop, did you have an opening statement as well?
My name is Pastor Jerry Bishop, and I am grateful to be the senior pastor here to the LifeQuest Urban Outreach Center.
And we thought it was a dynamic opportunity to have a listening session on our campus as a community-based, very community-involved ministry. And arguably, the drone discussion could drastically involve our community. We absolutely said yes, and we'll continue to say yes for any kind of community listening session on anything that impacts our neighborhood and the population that we strive to serve at a very involved level. With that being said, I'd like to just give you a couple ground rules in our fellowship on tonight. We want to make sure during the Q&A that we are maintaining a very high level of mutual respect. If you think about not being polite, unkind, or rude, don't think about it, because at that moment, we will separate you from the meeting. I want to make that extremely clear. Absolutely have a great time, have some very respectful dialogue, but remember exactly where you're at and maintain that level of decorum. If we were in church, I would say amen, and the call and response would be amen. That means it is so. So now that we're everybody we've agreed to a verbal contract on good conduct, we're going to execute a dynamic meeting, and we want you to enjoy yourself, enjoy our facility, but most importantly, engage in some healthy dialogue to help us maintain a healthy community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. An overview of the agenda for tonight. We're doing the welcome and introduction. We'll have the overview of the surveillance policy summary from Brandon Davis, then speak about the drone system proposal with Chief Winstrom, and then we'll go into the Q&A and comment section. We'll talk about the process and my role as moderator when we get to that point. So without any further ado, I'll hand the microphone over and the clicker to Brandon.
All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. All right, I'm super grateful for the opportunity to talk to you all about our surveillance policy. We have limited time, and it's a long policy, so we did provide a one-pager that really gives an overview, a high-level overview of what the surveillance policy says, how it works, and what that implementation looks like. But I will take you through some of the major components of that policy at this time. So it's important that we understand that the policy was originally created in 2015 under City Manager Sundstrom, and around 2020 through 2021, the city began engaging with members of community, including the NAACP, to really revise the surveillance policy. It was brought to our attention that we should look at ways to increase the protection of the privacy interests of community members. So we really worked diligently to do that. There are about 10 major areas where changes were made in the surveillance policy. They include, we expanded the purpose statement, added definitions to help community better understand what was in that policy. We also worked to elevate resident voice by creating and including a public hearing requirement. We worked to create a standard of review for approval of the acquisition of surveillance equipment, as well as explicitly added equity considerations for the operational procedures. In addition to that, we created a governance structure which included the use of the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability to receive complaints. We established the Public Safety Committee as the Surveillance Oversight Committee, meaning that they provide additional oversight to the surveillance process, as well as increased transparency by creating reporting requirements that didn't exist previously. In addition, we established some prohibited uses for this technology, and then finally removed and replaced some language regarding exigent circumstances. Now, we talk about this on a one-pager, and I know I'm going fast, but I have to, right? So when we talk about the purpose statement, the big thing to understand is that the red indicates the additions in that purpose statement. You will see that we work to include language that talked about ensuring the safety of individuals and property, as well as investigating illegal behavior. But importantly, we also included language that said to protect the privacy interests of Grand Rapidians when we have that technology and when that technology is purchased. You'll see some definitions here, which are included in Section 1. So Section 1 is basically definitions, and I won't read all of them, but it is available on the city's webpage. If you were to search surveillance policy or administrative policy 1503, you'll find the full text document that explains all of the surveillance policy. I want to read a couple of key terms that I think are important for tonight's discussion and understanding. One is, what is surveillance equipment? So surveillance equipment is anything that is capable of capturing or recording data, including images, video, photographs, or audio operated by or at the direction of a city department or city employee, which may deliberately or inadvertently capture activities of individuals on public or private property. Additionally, it explicitly states that drones or unmanned aircraft and any attached equipment are also surveillance equipment. Now, it's important that we point out there, you'll see it says any, and that's because surveillance equipment can be used by any city department if it goes through this process. So any department that's looking to get that type of equipment will have to go through this same process. Another thing that's important to point out is that since 2015, when the surveillance policy was originally created in its original form, there has never been a substantiated violation of this policy. So the revisions that were made in an effort to improve the policy without substantiated violations of the policy at that point. That speaks to the way surveillance equipment has been used in Grand Rapids up to this point. Now, when we talk what surveillance equipment is, it's also important to point out the fact that there are certain things that are not considered surveillance equipment. That includes a camera capturing like city buildings, right? That's the easiest way to explain that. So if you had like a camera on your home filming what was happening at your front door, things of that nature, the city, basically this policy says that the city can do something similar. We can record the activities that are happening at a city building to protect what's happening at that city building. So when we now move on, we move to Section 2, which really talks about the process for requesting and acquiring surveillance equipment. And I'm going to do the really quick version of this. So I'm going to use the one-pager, and you can follow along with me. But if you were to look at that one-pager, you would see several steps on how the surveillance equipment can be purchased and what that process looks like. So the first part of that, and that's the third blurb on there, it says approval of the city manager to bring a request forward. So in order for a department to seek to purchase surveillance equipment or acquire surveillance equipment, first the city manager would have to approve that item getting on the agenda. When we talk about the agenda, we talk about a city commission agenda or one of their committee agendas. The next thing is that then goes to the public safety committee. Now this again is a new component. Previously, the Public Safety Committee was not involved in the process of acquiring surveillance equipment, but a request would go to the Public Safety Committee, and at that time, the departmental manager or whoever is appointed to handle that will give an overview of what it looks like, what that process is, what the operational procedures are, as well as the data management protocols associated with it, and they'll request a public hearing. The Public Safety Committee then has the option of recommending a public hearing to the before the City Commission, and that process was followed here, right? So the Public Safety Committee recommended a public hearing before the City Commission, and then there is an actual public hearing. A public hearing is an opportunity for community members to come and speak to the City Commission and tell them their concerns or raise their questions regarding whatever the topic is. In this case, it would be regarding the unmanned aerial surveillance. The next step after that is the actual public hearing, and then an official request to acquire equipment will come through the fiscal committee. When we think about the fiscal committee, we're talking about the committee that approves expenditures. So the fiscal committee will then have the opportunity to review that request compared to the budget and things of that nature, and then they will make a recommendation. They'll take a vote, and if they were to approve it at the fiscal committee level, what happens after that point is that it goes on to the consent agenda. And the consent agenda is essentially the agenda that includes all of the things that all of the committees may have voted on, and it's brought to the full City Commission. So the full City Commission can then vote on whether or not they want to approve those items. So the final step in that process is that the full City Commission will have the opportunity to determine if they want to support the acquisition of the surveillance equipment by either to approve the consent agenda, taking the item off of consent and considering that separately. So that takes you through the process in a really, really quick way. But again, if you were to look at Administrative Policy 1503, you'll see that in more detail. I do think it's important in the limited time I have just to talk a little bit about the standard of approval. One of the things you will see is that an additional element that was added to the surveillance policy, meaning it did not exist in this original form, is a standard of approval, and that standard is the best interest of Grand Rapidians. That means that anyone that is involved in the purchase of surveillance equipment must consider the best interests of Grand Rapidians. You'll see that best interest standard, which is also on your one-pager, says that they must consider the fiscal impacts of the purchase, the community impact, privacy interest of impacted individuals, and ensure that the uses of the technology will not be based upon discriminatory practices or factors. So those are the things that are to be considered in making that decision. So we'll move real quickly. Then you have your operational protocols, meaning this section requires the department that is seeking the surveillance equipment to say how they're going to use that equipment. What does that process look like? Importantly, some additional language was added in here, and here's the data management protocols, but additional language was added in our surveillance policy to require that adverse impacts that may cause discriminatory outcomes to be considered, and that specifically in those operational protocols, those should be addressed, meaning how would they be mitigated? In my last few moments, I'll talk about Section 6, which is governance and oversight. So this is a completely new section to the surveillance policy. This was, again, added through that community engagement and the work that we did with the NAACP. When we talk about this section, essentially what it does is it allows community members to file complaints regarding any type of issue that may occur involving this policy. So if it's the use of some type of surveillance equipment, directly with my office, with the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. That gives community a different place outside of the police department to lodge complaints, and it allows our office it gives our office the authority to audit those complaints, to look into those complaints, and to provide updates regarding that to the Public Safety Committee. Again, that's another level of transparency that didn't exist previously because those Public Safety Committee meetings are public and open to the public. So in addition to that, I already talked about the addition of the Surveillance Oversight Committee, meaning that Public Safety Committee now is involved in that space. One thing that's important about this policy and how that works is that the community members who serve on the Public Safety Committee also are allowed to raise their voice, meaning they are allowed to be a part of the vote on these issues. Their position must be included as it relates to that, which is different than most other items that come before the Public Safety Committee. This was intentionally included to make sure that there was an elevation of resident voice in these conversations. The last thing here in Section 6 really talks about an annual surveillance report. So we're finishing the first full fiscal year where this surveillance policy was in place. So an annual report will come about that lists essentially any type of violations that may have come up or any type of concerns that were raised and the responses to those things. Section 7 talks about how the policy can be changed, and that means that the city manager has the authority to make changes, but those changes must be brought to our Public Safety Committee as well. Section 8 talks about prohibited uses, and I think this is an important section to talk about. When we talk about those prohibited uses, it says that the equipment cannot be used to harass, intimidate, or discriminate against any individual or group. Additionally, the equipment can't be utilized to conduct any type of personal business, so it has to be used for its intended purpose. Lastly, this equipment cannot be weaponized, except for in the very specific section of extenuating circumstances. And I think it's important that we talk about what extenuating circumstances are. It's included in the definition section of the surveillance policy, but if you were to flip the page over to the breakdown of the surveillance policy by section under Section 9, you'll see that extenuating circumstances are incidents involving a good faith belief that an imminent danger to individual safety or public health is likely. So those are the only cases in which the city manager is even allowed to consider that. Lastly, Section 9 talks about a temporary exemption for surveillance services. So that would mean like if there was an extenuating circumstance, like a weather event that was happening that was going to cause sufficient or significant damage in the city or something like that, and it needed to be scoped, and we didn't have the technology to do it, and it fell under the surveillance policy, it would allow for there to be special approval outside of this normal process to approve that for a very specific use to handle that weather event, and then it would have to stop being used immediately, report it to the Public Safety Committee, and if any department will want to continue using that, they would have to go through the entire process to get approval. Lastly, Section 10 says, in a nutshell, if we already have the technology and it breaks, you don't have to go back to the beginning of the process to replace the equipment. You can get substantially similar equipment in order to continue to work. That is a very quick version of the surveillance policy, but I hope it provided you with additional information to better understand it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over to Chief Winstrom for his section of the informational presentation.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, Director Davis. Let's see, some of you have, I see a lot of familiar faces, so some of you have probably been through this presentation many times. This will be the fourth time going through the slide deck, so I shortened it. I don't want to be redundant as to what Director Davis said. So he kind of already went over some of these which are prohibited, but we've enhanced this group to include what the final draft will show. And if you're listening to this, you'll see that some of the concerns that I've heard in all the community engagement I've done is, okay, even if we trust the current chief to use a drone in a constitutional way, what's to say that the next chief does not? And the answer to that is the policy that is put forward is the one that the commission will base their opinion on whether or not they're going to vote for. If moving forward we want to change that policy, for example, we plan on prohibiting facial recognition. Use of facial recognition will be in the policy. If down the road I were to think, or another future chief would say, we're going to use facial recognition technology in the drones, we would have to go through this entire process over again in a very transparent way so that we get this information out again. So as you can see, those will be in the policy. This is what we plan to use the drones for. Earlier on, when we started this discussion, we talked about everything from using drones as first responders to using drones just for mission-based deployment, and that's what we've settled on, the direction that we intend to create a draft policy around, and that is using drones for traffic crash reconstruction, evidence collection, and by that I mean aerial photographs of crime scenes, search and rescue, that includes everything from a suicidal individual, an elderly individual with dementia, a toddler that's gone missing in a wooded area. Large area searches is a perfect example of that. Critical incidents, fleeing felons, especially fleeing armed felon, disasters, man-made or otherwise, and then large events. And another group of questions I got is in reference to protests. And we've had dozens of protests since I've been here. I was in charge of probably 100 protests in Chicago. I am a very big fan of the United States Constitution, the Michigan Constitution, and I can assure you that we will always use drones in a constitutional way because that's the law and it's the right thing to do. And as we've had many protests following the April 4th officer-involved shooting of Patrick Lyoya, we had protests out in front of the police station, some of them with small groups of people, as 20 or 30 people. And my job was to facilitate those individuals' right to be heard. We had large groups. We had as many as 500, nearly 1,000 people marching through the streets. My job was to facilitate those individuals with the right to be heard. Now, we had help during those protests from other local law enforcement, and the Kent County Sheriff was there. And the Kent County Sheriff had a drone in the air, and they asked me, like, what do you want the drone for? And the answer was simple. We utilized that drone so that we could remove all our police officers from those protests and facilitate a free and loud protest, whatever direction they wanted to walk. We were able to use construction vehicles to close the streets so that protests could go where those protests wanted to go for such a very passionate incident that I felt it was very important to facilitate those First Amendment rights. So that's how we used the drones previously. That's how we would use them in the future for protests. And now we're talking about things like the Fifth Third bank run. We're not using drones, whether it's a protest or a marathon to collect information on individuals. What we're doing is looking in real time at information about things like traffic, about things like safety, unsafe conditions. 4th of July fireworks is another good example of that. Evidence quality, as you can see, just a quick example. If an individual in Grand Rapids today is in a motor vehicle crash, photographs are very valuable through insurance, through if it turns into a criminal incident, etc. The image on the right is what you will get currently from the Grand Rapids Police Department. The image on the left is what you would get, including the patterns of tire marks. That is the quality of the image that you would receive if you got into a crash in Kent County, not in within the city limits of Grand Rapids. So you were getting a lower standard of evidence for your case. As you can see, search and rescue, these are examples of thermal imaging. You can see the, actually I'll show the video for the sake of time. You can see the middle example is even without thermal imaging, you can use the camera on the drone to locate a child in a wooded area. And on the left, unfortunately, as you can see, in the Grand River there, you can use the vantage point of a drone is such that you can see into the water much better than if you were looking from the ground. This is, hopefully I can get this to play. Let's see. Oh, okay. If you have the ability to fast forward, let's just like halfway through. And if you don't, you don't. Yep. Let it run for a little bit. So this is a compilation which we played. We played a few of these at the previous ones. I knocked it down to just one. The entire story, I believe this is a individual, is it a robbery suspect who decided to get away by jumping in the Grand River and swimming across. As soon as it shows the images that you're able to see from a drone with thermal imaging. So generally speaking, whether this was a criminal sexual assault offender, a murderer, a robbery person, a missing person, a suicidal individual, you wouldn't be able to see them because this is a wooded area. But as you can see on the image, you can when you see flashes there, those are actually flashlights of the police officers. And each one of these dots is the heat sensor for a human. And you can see here, we can see the individual in the water. You see the difference from a drone looking over large events. You have a better idea of traffic patterns, of whether or not there are safety issues there. That's what we use the drones for. Director Davis touched on this. We would require documentation for every single use of the drone, and that includes reason of the flight, time, date, duration, flight path, the operator's name, flight summary, video tagged and stored, and then what we do with that information is we provide it to the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability, and Director Davis would then make his assessment. Moving forward, again, as we touched on it, all of this would be in a final draft policy before anything is approved. If we wanted to go back and change, if we wanted to use facial recognition, if we wanted to use it for drone as a first responder, we would do this entire process and start it all over again. And that's it. Short and sweet.
Thank you very much. All right, for the next section, we're getting to the Q&A and the comment section that will open up to, we have some questions that came in advance of the meeting, as well as some that are coming in online. And we're going to mix that with people's comments and questions here in person. So in terms, oh, I guess my slides aren't here. All right, so in terms of the process, what we're going to do is I'll moderate and have each person has 3 minutes. We ask that you try and ask one question at a time. So throughout that 3 minutes, however many questions you'd like to ask, we'll direct them to the appropriate person to respond. If you have a repeat question that we've heard before, there's a chance that I'll say the question was asked. However, does anyone have an additional response to provide? and then you'll have the opportunity to ask another question. Trying to think if there's any other portion of that. I think we're good to go. So if someone has a specific question that's here in person, you can. Are we doing a line, David, or just coming up? Yep. And I'm going to start by taking one of the questions off the previously submitted, and then we'll just take turns that way. All right. Any questions regarding that? We're good. All right. So the first question: with the initial budget being set at $100,000, what additional ongoing costs are expected?
The additional ongoing costs associated with retention of data and upkeep of the drones would be approximately $20,000 a year.
Do one more. Will there be a limit on equipment used in drones, for example, thermal imaging?
Thermal imaging is a valuable tool, so that would be something we definitely would not want to exclude from the drones. However, facial recognition technology is something that I've heard a lot of feedback in the public engagement that I had that this community has concerns about. So we would be looking to prohibit facial recognition technology in the drones in our policy.
Okay, we're going to go to the audience mic for the first question, and then we have a timer for your 3 minutes. So if you'd like to begin.
Hello. This question is mostly directed to Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, I was hoping you could shed some light on how accountability will be upheld for when, if these drones are ever misused. Now, let me finish, please. So, because it seems like it's based on a lot of trust between GRPD, city officials. Now, and you also talked about filing complaints, but I was looking through your office's policy on complaints, and I was hoping you could clear some things up. So in section 615, you talk about how when a community member wants to file a complaint, you need a Department of Internal Affairs unit. Okay, cool. But in section 616, you say this: upon receipt of a complaint intake form, the Internal Affairs Unit will determine if the allegations rise to the level of a qualifying complaint. So, and then from there, if the Internal Affairs Unit does not determine that it's big enough to warrant an investigation, you will inquire, and then essentially you will base your future actions around what they tell you. But if an investigation takes place, the Internal Affairs Unit will render a disposition based on the facts and circumstances of the case. The Internal Affairs Unit will expound on its findings in a complaint disposition report, and the OPA will receive a redacted copy for review and auditing purposes. So this is kind of what it seems to me, and I'm really hoping you can shed some light and prove me wrong here, but when we file a complaint, it sounds like GRPD is the one that gets to decide how serious it is. And then if they decide it's not serious, any further action your office wants to take is based on what they say after you ask them nicely. And then if they do an investigation, they'll give you a redacted copy of their disposition So they'll only tell you what they want you to know. So I was hoping you could maybe clarify some things in your policy in regards to complaints and, again, how accountability will be enforced.
Thank you for the question. So the first part I'll respond to, I'll try to respond to it all in one space. So you referred to OPA's policy. That is not the same thing as what we're talking about with the surveillance policy. So these are two separate policies with two separate ways in which investigations occur. Now, related to other types of complaints that may be raised, it's a different discussion that we can go into detail with regarding our general policy with which you just referred. However, the surveillance policy specifically governs surveillance equipment, and this gives specific jurisdiction to my office regarding how we can go about investigating complaints related to surveillance equipment. So the surveillance policy actually predates our office policy, which governs general affairs that may happen. Again, a different type of complaint regarding use of force or something like that will be governed by the language that you see in our regular policy. The surveillance policy governs the unmanned aerial surveillance or things of that nature that fall under the list of surveillance equipment. I hope that provides some clarity regarding that. The second part of your question, though, about how it will be, how accountability will be held up. Essentially, this policy gives a couple of different ways for us to do that. One of the best things we can do is make sure the public knows what's happening, right? So those are the transparency requirements that are added into the policy. It gives OPA the ability to report on things that have not previously been reported on. Now, there haven't been complaints to report on, but there was not a mechanism before that to report on. Additionally, we're able to raise those complaints to the level of the Public Safety Committee. Meaning that we can take those complaints, do our audit, and bring it to the Public Safety Committee and say, hey, Public Safety Committee, we found a violation of this policy. At that point, this policy allows the Public Safety Committee to say, hey, police department or whatever city department has surveillance equipment, you can no longer use that surveillance equipment because there has been a violation. In addition to that, if an individual staff member were to have violated their surveillance policy or maybe the manual procedures of the police department, there can also be the employee discipline component, which then falls under the other policy in which you're speaking.
Thank you for your comments and questions. For the next person.
Hi, yeah, I'm going to say my comments first and then ask a question at the end so I can have as much time to talk. One of my main concerns with this is the suggestion to use these drones in the case of suicidal persons or suicidal subjects as it's presented in the presentation. That is really concerning to me, and that will be part of my question. Is utilizing drones when someone may be going through a paranoid episode who is at very high risk for suicidal actions. I feel as though the use of drones will not de-escalate any situation involving a suicidal subject, even if that subject has committed a crime. And I personally don't believe that this program is consistent with what the GRPD has said that their priorities are, which is crime prevention. I wish that these funds would be further implemented into really successful programs like Cure Violence through the Urban League, basically training citizens to work as violence interrupters rather than investing in more surveillance technology that is expensive as well as is not consistent with de-escalation procedures. So I guess my question would be, what would that process be if there was a suicidal person potentially who had committed a crime? How would you utilize these drones, and how do you feel that that would be part of a de-escalation technique? And that's a question to whoever would like to respond.
Thank you so much, and that is a extremely thoughtful and important question, and I have to take credit for not putting enough thought into that slide on the PowerPoint. Having lost two friends myself in Chicago who died by suicide, that is very impactful to me. And I will just tell you that I was going off on one specific incident, and that was about 2 weeks ago now. We had an individual on the 9th floor of a building downtown at Ransom. And she had cut herself severely and was essentially holding herself hostage. She would not let paramedics in. She would not let the fire department in. And so what we did was the Kent County Sheriff was on scene to assist us, and we utilized their drone to go up to the 9th floor and look into the apartment so that we could see when she put the edged weapon down, so that we could force our way in and we could take her to the hospital. And she did live and she did survive. And I will say, without a doubt, it is part of the reason that is the case is because we were able to safely make entry with the drone. Now, that's a very specific incident, but with all the public engagement that I have done, I will say I want to acknowledge that having a drone, especially one visible and flying over an individual who may be a suicidal subject, would not be appropriate as a de-escalation technique. So that was just one very specific example, and I could think of other specific examples. For example, if we're trying to locate someone and the only information we have is that they're armed, they're suicidal, and they're in the woods. Generally speaking, a group of us would go out, with flashlights and walk through the woods. If we were able to narrow the location down where they were using the heat sensor on a drone without that drone creating what could be an elevation in the emotional state of that person, we would do so. But it's something that is a very thoughtful question. I should have been more thoughtful on the PowerPoint. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm going to briefly take two questions from the online submissions, and then we'll return to the people here in person. The first question, will recordings from the drones be made? If so, how long will they be stored?
So all missions, all directed missions for the drone will be recorded, and they will be stored with the same record retention schedule that our body-worn cameras are stored or in-car cameras stored. And that would be if it is a very serious incident, such as a homicide, it would likely be retained for all time. If it is a felony arrest, it will be a minimum of, I believe it's 6 years, a misdemeanor arrest, a minimum of 3 years. If there's no arrest, then the standard, I believe, is 120 days. Unless there was some other reason to hold it, be it a FOIA request, some sort of litigation, or a complaint or something like that.
The next question that was provided, are these things going to be roaming around randomly?
So when we started this conversation, we talked about the Chula Vista model and other models where drones are used as first responders. And to have a quicker response, some jurisdictions think that it's good to have drones in the air and drones available at all time. That's not the model that will be in the proposed policy that we're looking at. The model that we're going to look to is use them for just mission-specific events for those type of incidents that I discussed. So the answer is no.
If you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, most of you know me. I'm Jose Rodriguez, community member, school board trustee for GRPS. I just wanted to make a quick statement and I'll make my question. But so I was just thinking about policy and it only being as good as, the police department that's sworn to uphold it. And currently GRPD has, dozens of open civil rights violations cases against it. And so that, kind of makes me worry just about really policy is there. That doesn't mean it can't be violated. And that's a huge issue for me. That's a huge issue for a large amount of the community. But my question was, I know, Brandon, you said that there was there was unsubstantiated claims made against the policy. I'm wondering how many violations against this policy that were unsubstantiated have there been? And then which governing body decided that they were unsubstantiated?
Thank you for the question. What I said was that there have been no substantiated claims. I did not say that there were unsubstantiated claims. I'm unaware of any claims related to a violation of the surveillance policy. However, I try to be careful with my language and not speak to things that I can't be 100% certain of, but I can say no complaints regarding the surveillance policy have been filed with my office.
Okay.
Nor am I aware of any complaints regarding this surveillance policy being filed with the city of Grand Rapids at all.
Okay. And so let's say there were in the future. Sorry, is it okay if I do a follow-up? So the governing body that would, deal with these claims would be, just for clarification, would be?
So the complaints would be filed with my office. My office would do the investigation. And for those who don't know, the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability is a separate office from the Grand Rapids Police Department. We have to go through process and procedure in order to obtain information or access generally. But then those complaints can come, once we do our audit, we go to the Public Safety Committee, which has been created or charged with being the Surveillance Oversight Committee as well. The reason it was charged and a part of the reason it was selected is because there are community members as well as commissioners who serve on that body.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask your question.
I have a quick comment, then a question. I appreciate the approach that's being taken and thought that's being put into it, because I don't want random surveillance as much as the next guy, but I appreciate the mission direct approach and the policies that are in place to use the drones. So I do support what we're talking about here. And I think that it would save money on labor costs, so those funds could be redirected elsewhere too, which was good to see. But my question was, because I know we mentioned the sheriff and some of the other counties around that do have them in use, and I was just curious how long they've had those and how long they've been in use.
Thank you for the question. So the Kent County Sheriff's Office and the Michigan State Police have the most robust program in the state, and MSP and Kent County have been operating for 6 to 7, 8 years in that range. So for an example, Kent County last year had 200 flights. So they have a very robust program.
I will say too, I want to thank Chief Brown for being here. And was it 6 years ago that the Grand Rapids Fire Department also obtained drones?
Thank you. I'm going to do 2 questions from online. This sort of follows up with a component of the gentleman's question just a moment ago. What is the financial justification for this purchase, and can the GRPD address why moving patrol officers to a drone duty is helpful in the face of staffing issues?
Okay, so here's how it works, and this is about efficiency. At this point in time, if we have a traffic crash, and we have Sergeant Barthel here who's in charge of our traffic crash unit, we need to do reconstruction. Reconstruction takes hours without the use of a drone. During reconstruction of a traffic crash, whether fatal or just extremely serious, every point of access on that road has to be cut off by a police officer. So you're talking usually 4, maybe more police cars that will be down the entire time you're doing the traffic reconstruction. So utilizing a drone will limit that time from many hours to perhaps just an hour. So just the very efficiency of having those officers available for 911 calls. Add that to crime scene reconstruction. Crime scene photography, whether it is a fatal shooting or a shooting where there was an injury. We want those photographs. They are important for court. And we get them now, but we get them with ladders and standing on top of vans and things like that. That takes time. It takes time to move the van and move the ladders. It's more liability for us. Every extra minute that we hold down a serious shooting scene, that's numerous officers, at least 6 officers to maintain an average shooting scene, many more. So just the efficiency of that, we're not talking about having a police officer assigned. Like I said, we're not using drones as first responders, so this would not be an added job. This would be the drone in the trunk of a supervisor's vehicle and to respond to a scene where they would be going anyhow. That individual can still be blocking a road if they need to block a road while they operate the zone with their vehicle. So it really is, from an efficiency standpoint only, efficiency. Throw in the other examples I gave, whether you're looking for an elderly individual with Alzheimer's, a missing toddler. We had one toddler that was taken in the back of a stolen vehicle that was still in their car seat, and I had to activate. We had 20 officers at training, and we had to pull all 20 officers at trainings and put them in a car so that we could do a grid search for that vehicle, because it was a hot summer day with the windows rolled up before that baby died. And we found it, but that was because we happened to have 20 extra officers working. Whereas if we had a drone, we could do that much quicker. So think of the amount of officers that these incidents take up. And what you're getting is obviously better police service through photography, more efficiency, and quicker return of dedicated officers to the roads, or not even needing the officers for the case of a missing individual in a forested area where we might have 20 officers walk in a line through the field. We may only need 1 officer operating a drone and 1 officer in that field. So it really is a tool that adds efficiency.
I'm going to take one more question from online and then defer it over. How does the PD interpret the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable searches and seizures in the context of drone surveillance?
Thanks. So here the Fourth Amendment doesn't change if you're whether I have a camera standing on a sidewalk or whether I have a camera at an elevated platform. utilized in a drone. So the interpretation is exactly the same. If I don't have a right as a police officer to peek over the fence of a house, or to peek into a window, to walk myself into an area, then that drone doesn't have the right to go there either. So we will still follow the warrant requirements that are laid out in the law. Like I mentioned the First Amendment already. I'll say the Fourth Amendment. I'm a big fan of that one too, and all the rest.
Sir, you can ask your question.
Thank you. So I'm coming here basically just on a comment section, but I've read the policy, has very good ideas in that. I'm an IT guy myself, so data retention and data, how you use that data is also very near and dear to my heart. But otherwise, I've heard of uses of drones in other departments. I do work downtown. I've had our building got shot at once. A second time there was, I think, an accident out front, and it's sometimes the night, and it's especially as though they're not used as first responders all the time. I am very sure that that technology can be much more helpful, just like cops use cars, just like cops use cameras. It's a good tool to have in your arsenal to actually support that. So I really support that. And finally, I was just the other day, happenstance, I drove through Walker, and I happened upon their parade. I don't live in Walker, so I didn't realize the Memorial Day parade, but I came upon an officer surveilling the traffic, just stopped on the side of the road with his drone, making sure that their traffic patterns were followed. So that kind of stuff is, I can see in action, very beneficial to you guys, and I'm appreciative that you guys are doing that, especially when a lot of people work downtown, and I see stuff every day. This kind of stuff is very good. I'm glad it's happening, and I'm glad you're taking initiative on it, so thank you.
To take another question that was presented online, will drones be used primarily as reactive measures to issue tickets?
We don't have a system in place to utilize drones to issue tickets at all. We don't use red light cameras in the state of Michigan. We don't use speed cameras in the state of Michigan. So the short answer is no, we will not be issuing any tickets with these drones.
I'm going to take one more from online, and then I'll hand it over to you if you don't mind. The next question, will citizens be able to audit flight paths? And I'm not sure who.
And of course, what we talked about, I don't mean to steal this from you, Director Davis, because we will be documenting everything and forwarding it to the director's office for review. But also the FAA requires us to track all flight paths, and that information is actually available online.
Not specific to that, but I did want to make sure, and it was brought to my attention that want to make sure that everyone understands what the Public Safety Committee is. And I think I talked about it a little bit, but just for the purpose of clarity, the Public Safety Committee is a subcommittee of the City Commission. So there are several different subcommittees of the whole City Commission that work in specific areas. Like we have the Fiscal Committee that we talked about a little earlier that talks about expenditures. Our Public Safety Committee talks about issues that impact public safety. Added to their normal work that they've done previously has been the surveillance policy responsibility. So in addition to the other conversations they have about public safety, they now serve as the Surveillance Oversight Committee, which is what gives them the authority to hear about those audits that I would raise to them if there was a complaint and we found that there was a violation or something of that nature. It also is what gives them the specific authority to disallow the use of surveillance equipment if there was a violation.
Ask your question.
Yeah, good evening. I guess I have more of like a comment. I grew up on the southeast side of Grand Rapids, 3rd Ward, for a long time. And in doing that, there's been a feeling of, especially with the police department in your office, trust, accountability, and there's some questions on integrity right now. It's been going on the last few years, I think. With that, bringing this into addition to those problems to the southeast side is a concern of a lot of people. Kind of reminds me, will we be going to stop and frisk next? In addition to this, I mean, the police department has all type of options right now to do things, support. And I just think that we need to straighten out some other things, maybe increasing the trust relationships in the community, maybe talk about some accountability in the community, maybe talk about some people that might not be as integral in the community, even though we have a great police department. I'm just saying, there's other things, and just adding this pressure, especially some of our young boys, is not good to do. Even though you're saying we got policies, but policies sometimes are decided by judges, and we get in front of those judges, and the policies change. So I'm saying, drones, some cases, but I just don't think, maybe you could try it on the northwest side, southwest side, northeast side, and see how it works, and then come to the other side of town. But I'm just saying, for the southeast side, I'm real concerned about some of my kids and friends of mine, the interaction they're going to have with police department and decrease, and how these drones are going to be used. Because it's a real issue with integrity right now, not only in Grand Rapids, but in this country. Okay? And we need to look at that. So are we going to be drones now? Next week it'll be stop and frisk. How close are we to that? And I'm just saying, I'm real concerned about that happening to our community.
Thank you for your comment. Is there someone else here that would like to make a comment before I go to another question online? Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? It's kind of in between comments and questions. Like he said, accountability going to be taking action for. Oh, sorry. Yes. So your name is Windstorm? Okay. So question is, how did you get your position? Were you voted in from the people, or?
I was hired, I started March 7th of 2022, and the individual who hired me was the city manager, and it was,
Name?
sorry?
Name, please.
Mr. Mark Washington.
Okay, and then on the dice, is that a tactic that you brought here from your exposition in Chicago?
No, and I wouldn't call DICE a tactic. DICE is more of a, I mean, it's a community engagement. So it's an acronym. Mike, I've said, how is it different from other acronyms? But it's completely different because it's literally the engagement that we have with the community once we look at the data, which informs us, and we want to inform the community where elevated levels of gun violence are. So that's what DICE is. It stands for Data Informed Community Engagement.
Okay, and have the crime rate lower or increase since that was MCA'd?
There's not statistically relevant scientific data at this point, since it was just last summer that it started. So you can play with the numbers however you want. You could say we're down one murder from last year, but I don't think that DICE is that. And DICE, where the goal is certainly to reduce the level of gun violence, it's not a short-term solution. It's a recognition that the police aren't always the answer for everything, that we need to address things other than arresting our way out of the issues. So we work on root causes, and I am happy that the rest of the city, including Jennifer, who's been involved in helping facilitate, has gotten on board to put more resources into these pockets of places where the data shows that a young man, my son's age is...
I mean, you kind of taking up my time. It's just yes or no.
I'm sorry. It's yours.
Not to be rude. But, okay, then I just lost train of thought because that took so long. Sorry. Yeah, he took up all my time. I just hold up train of thought. Sorry. Oh, no, not background questions. But, okay, now you mentioned the little lawyer death, well, murder. You said that you went to protesters. Now I understand that you made... What did you do for the protesters besides watch them with the drones?
The question is, what did I do for protesters?
Yes, you stated that the protesters, and it was a group, stuff. And then you went to stating that they was watched with drones.
Right. So what's the question?
What did you do for the protesters? Like, how were they heard? Like, explain, like, from my understanding, you did roll calls and stuff to get the news out that girls were getting charged. But
What did I do for the protesters?
what do you do
There's
for the
probably some here you
community
could talk. Yeah,
and their
I spent a
emotions?
lot of time having conversations, including at the city commission meetings. I've stood in front of Congolese churches for probably a dozen or so hours
In this community?
at a time. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces in here. You can criticize me, criticize the
I'm not
department all you want,
criticizing
but I'll listen to you.
Mhm.
I'll listen to you all day long.
I-
So
that's the thing. We don't just need an ear. We need actions. You know, we need, like
yeah,
you said,
and
accountability.
you're getting it.
Or, I'm you know.
Thank you for your comments. I'm going to take 2 online, and then I'll get back to the in-person. Next question, will these be used to get visual information about a situation that's possibly dangerous? I believe there was some conversation, but do you have any additional?
Yeah, it's a very vague statement, so more specifically, we would limit it to those incidents that we described, but yes, that's a good way to say it.
How can the public provide feedback or voice concerns about the drone program once it's underway? So I'm not sure if you both have an aspect of that. Brandon, you want to start?
If there are concerns or complaints related to any use of surveillance equipment in the city of Grand Rapids, they can be filed with our office. You can go to search the city's website for the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability. It's probably the easiest way to find that. You can also give us a call at 616-456-4OPA.
Would you like ask your question?
Hi, my name is Brett. I live here in the Grand Rapids community. In this policy 15-03 item 8C, it notes that in extenuating circumstances, the city manager has the power to approve surveillance devices be weaponized, which your policy defines as including firearms and bombs. I worry about our community's safety, especially during peaceful and rightful protests, which you, Chief Windstrom, have mentioned and acknowledged the importance of those protests. Can you explain what circumstances and give examples of what would justify the weaponization of these drones with a firearm or a bomb?
Thanks. And one thing that Director Davis and I have talked about is, this surveillance policy predates me. The original surveillance policy predates Director Davis. So that's a floor, not a ceiling. And so our policy for drones would eliminate that. It would say that weaponization is prohibited. So to make that change, then moving forward, we would have to do this entire process again to make those changes. Yeah, but I think that's because of the date of the policy.
Okay, so that would be changed if it were to go forward, that would be eliminated?
Right. It would be, so the policy that the city commission would vote on would be, this is the floor, but the addition is the policy that they're actually going to be voting on for the drone use of the police department, operational procedures, and that would restrict that. Right.
Thank you.
Good question.
Next question.
So there's been well-established studies that have been done that have established the case that city resources are disproportionately being used on police and over-policing in some communities where I live on. I work in the corner of Madison and Hall, and sometimes I see, I count like maybe 4 or 5 police cars going by at a time, and I see one person being stopped, and there's like 4 or 5 cops behind that person. Anybody with any common sense would agree that that's an overuse of police. The study that was done was that the way that the department sends officers to specific location is not done in a rational basis. If they would take on like the delivery software that maybe Amazon uses or any delivery company to dispatch officers to scenes, would make it so that we wouldn't need so much police. So my question is, in this case, given that any field where there's automation, there's technology, and we find that people are not needed to perform these tasks, if you are given the drones, are you going to do studies to see how these drones are making it so that it is less necessary for there be so many police officers being employed by the city of Grand Rapids, thereby making it less, diminishing the need for a police officer roaming around 49507 at the end of the month looking for tickets to give out to people and meeting their quota. Would you use that information gathered from the drones to assess whether you can cut more police officers?
So I've only been here 15 months, but we prohibit quotas in the Grand Rapids Police Department. So I'm not sure what the context or the premise, obviously. So I don't agree with the premise. Would we do a study? We evaluate our calls every year. They are holding a study about 76,000, and then what we do is we evaluate response time to calls. And of course, community feedback. If the majority of the community was demanding less police officers, that's something that we would definitely consider. But the majority of the community that we hear, that I hear emails and phone calls every single day, we want lower response time. We want more police officers. So we're not there yet. I would love to see drones make an impact. I don't think that's the case, but as technology improves, I didn't think I'd see drones in policing back when I was a cop 23 years ago. So who knows what's going to look like in another 23 years? Maybe we could. I'd be happy if we could use less police officers, because that would be a sign of a safer city. I would love that.
Is there someone with a question? Go ahead.
I would like to know how many drones would y'all have, and how would they be used? Prioritized, would it be the seriousness of the crime, or how would they be used if you got more than one situation going on?
So the plan is, depending on financial issues, as far as like we'd have to go through the fiscal process of request for purchase and everything. But the idea was we thought that about 6 drones, and that would be contingent. We'd also have to go get drone pilots. We have 2 drone pilots here with us tonight. So it's contingent on that. How you decide when to utilize a drone, that, as the captain said, Kent County's had them for years, and they average about 200. So they do, one every other day or so flights. So it'd be very rare that there would be 2 incidents on the same day. It's possible that we would have enough operators to fly 2, but we would not use them for every crime. We would use them for those specific circumstances of a lost individual, a fleeing felon, the accident reconstruction, and then the large groups where the drone could be utilized for traffic, for crowd safety and things like that. So not as many. It's not like we would use a drone anytime there was a crime. We would just use it under those specific circumstances. So less often than a lot of places.
We'll take another question in person.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up, Chief Winstrom, what you said about privacy earlier. You said that you as a police officer couldn't peek over someone's fence into their backyard, that would be an invasion of their privacy. I'm just trying to square that with how drones work, because I've flown drones. I've flown the DJI drones that you guys are trying to get, not those specific models, but other ones, and the cameras have a pretty wide field of view, so you don't need to fly them very high in order to see a lot of what's underneath them. So a first-story house, 10 feet with a roof, maybe 20 feet, a 2-story house, maybe 30 feet tall before you're up above it. I'm just not sure how you can use drones at all and not violate people's privacy rights if you can see into people's backyards from 20, 30 feet up.
Yeah, great question. And a lot of that comes up when you use drones as a first responder, because what you're using is you're putting a drone up and you're flying it across the city. And with that case, who knows how many backyards you're going to be looking to. When it's mission specific, for example, when we used it on ransom the other day, it's very easier to limit where that is. We do have written into the policy, if it is a situation where you're going to be putting it up and there would be the potential to look into places that you did not intend to look at, there's direction in the policies for how the drone pilot would react to that situation. But because we're not using it as a first responder, and because it is for the specific mission, if I'm flying over a city park looking for a lost child, there's no expectation of privacy there that I'm violating it. It is a city park. So it's less of a concern with not using it as drone as a first responder. When I put the drone up over a crime scene, I'm putting it up over the crime scene. So it'd be a much smaller list of instances. If to specifically answer what could be what we use it for, which that could come to place in, fleeing felon, an individual armed with a gun robs a bank and starts running across yards. Yeah, we would probably see, whether intentionally or accidentally, into people's yards, just as I would see into people's yards if I was the police officer on the ground chasing that person. So it would be, obviously there are those exigent circumstances, that there are times where we're not going to have a search warrant and we will be justified into looking places, but that happens every day in policing.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Rin. I'm a community member here, and I've been living here for about 5 years. I've been seeing a lot of policing activity, especially in my neighborhood. I live in the Baxter neighborhood. And I regularly hear the cops coming through 1 or 2 a.m. I'm hearing all that shit. And I'm kind of wondering, you've mentioned that the earlier example you had where you would bring a drone out and you would have just 2 people out in the field rather than 5 cops. What are the need for those 3 other cops? We could lay them off and then put all that money that we could save towards feeding the homeless and finding housing for unhoused communities. Putting action and putting money back into our school systems, making sure our students and our future are able to find community programs that can keep them growing and thriving in the future. So as a community member, I would personally like to say I'd like to see some more layoffs in the police department, because then we can put more taxpayer dollars towards programs that can actually help our communities, actually help grow and thrive for the future of Grand Rapids. That's something I would love to see here. But is there any ways that we can see the actual breakdown of the $100,000 that you're using to buy the 6 drones for this program? Why do we need $100,000? I mean, that's practically enough to buy a third of a house in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, so the short answer to your question is yes, absolutely, and that would be provided to the fiscal committee. When the commission gets a chance to vote, we have to provide them all information. And if I'm not new to this profession, I've heard the argument before of it's an either or. It's not an either or. I have a lot of friends in the Baxter community, and they are upset with the lack of patrols, the lack of response time, and I hear from them every single day, as do the other men in here with me. So I respect your opinion, and I understand it, but my job is to provide good police service to everybody in the city of Grand Rapids. At this time, the Walker Police Department, you're getting better police service up there, and that's something that the people in Baxter deserve, good police service, and I'm going to make sure that it's my job that they get it. But I appreciate it very much.
Still, how much are these drones costing, just the base rate? Because if it's is it 20 grand a drone? That's why it costs so much?
No, it would be it would be about $100,000, but the numbers aren't out. So until I finalize the formal policy, which was going to be done through this community engagement here, for example, it would be more expensive if we used facial recognition, AI, things like that. We're going to prohibit. So once the final draft policy is completed, we'll be able to put it out for our actual number. We estimated it at 100,000, and that would be for 6 drones, and that would also include all the technical retention costs. But again, it's not. I hear it all the time, but I want to tell you there have been municipalities which treated policing as either or. Either we help the homeless or we put money in policing, and those have been absolute disasters for the very communities that ostensibly those policies would look to lift up. I've seen it in Chicago. One of the great ways to become economically mobile, to increase your lifestyle, is to be protected, especially from gun violence. So that's something that's very important to me. Thanks.
Do we have another question from the audience?
Howdy, everyone. we've heard a couple of times so far tonight about the Kent County Sheriff's Department and their drone program. I guess my question is, this seems like a duplicative program. Is there not a good working relationship? Why do we need a drone program in Grand Rapids?
Yeah, I guess they could ask us the same question, or Walker, Kentwood, or Wyoming, or any of the other places. But we are in the city of Grand Rapids. We provide policing for our area. At any point in time, the sheriff can say, we're too busy, we're tired of carrying your weight. This is a basic tool for policing, and departments as small as Big Rapids with 18 police officers have drones. And I go every month with some of my command staff members to the Kent County Chiefs meeting. I meet with Sheriff LaJoy Young. I meet with our fellow chiefs across the county. And to be honest, this has become kind of humorous to them that we don't have drones. They've used it as a recruiting tool to encourage people to come to their departments, which are fully provided tools. So I have a great working relationship for them. When we call, they do still come. But I have to field a professional police department that's properly equipped, and that's what we're looking to do here.
So you're concerned that in the future that there won't be cooperation?
Oh no, and I should say too, we don't live, we live within city limits of Grand Rapids. The Kent County Sheriff do not patrol on a regular basis here. They have other duties, and by the time they arrive, whenever they do, or if we call Walker, whatever it is, I could have had a drone there oftentimes, like in the case of Ransom, with a woman who very well could have bled to death. I could have had that drone there 30 minutes earlier if I had their own drone. That building was about 5 blocks from the police department. That's a Grand Rapids individual who faced death, who because of a drone we were able to help her, and because of for me to say, well, we can get it. Maybe we can't that day. Maybe they're busy, and maybe 30 minutes would have killed her. So that's why we're just trying to have a properly equipped police department. It's my job to ask for that. But I appreciate the question very much.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions here? Ma'am, did you have a question? I'm going to let her since she didn't have a chance yet. Appreciate it.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad we could come out and we could discuss this. I'm not impressed. That's number one. You guys talk a good game, but in the end, it's all going to fall on the people. And every program that an awful lot of you guys implement end up criminalizing the black and brown melanated people of the community. And we're not going to have it. We deal with an awful lot. We've dealt with the situation with Patrick Loyola getting shot, and we want to see that situation resolved, okay? We want to see other situations resolved too. And for you guys to throw this in our lap is just plain disrespectful. It's disrespectful. I mean, the issue of racism is still an issue. And you guys are, again, as people have pointed out, being investigated by civil rights, as well as at one point, you guys were supposed to be investigated by the federal government. And so, we want to know how all these things are playing out. We don't want to keep dealing with different things and situations continuing to come up. Now, how many of these drones are in East Grand Rapids and in Creston and all these other different places? Do the elite people over there don't want these over there? And why would you think we would want them if they don't want them? And even if they did want them, we don't want them. Anyone?
I talked to Mark Harold over at East Grand Rapids, and they're working on purchasing drones. However, East Grand Rapids has had one murder in the last 60 years, I believe, and they don't have crime like we do. They don't have the need for a drone like we do. But our neighbors in Kentwood are purchasing. Wyoming has them. Obviously, Walker has them. They just added another one to their group. The Sheriff's Department has them. Kalamazoo has them. Holland has them. Just about every other police department with at least 30 officers has them. Yeah.
I don't think you guys can handle responsibility. I really don't. You know, I appreciate the officers that are doing their job. They do care about the community and humanity, but the ones that don't give a flip, you guys need to get them out. Most
I agree.
definitely. And you guys need to do psych evaluations on some of them. Let me see also. Yeah, you know what? I recently read on Google News how there's one county here, they're finna go to the Supreme Court about privacy, okay? And so I think that this situation, this conversation with the drones would be better settled and better discussed once they decide what goes on as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, because it is an invasion of our privacy. And our children need to know what privacy is, as well as what freedom is and peace of mind is. And having these drones around is not going to help us. If anything, like I said, it tends to criminalize the community even more. Okay? And as well, Brandon, I would like to say that, you know, I've called your office, and I would like to say that, you know, I felt like I was received very well, but every time I call, Claudette says that you're not available. Okay? And so, you know, you need to be available, you know. As well, I went to a food truck and talked to some people, and at any rate, they gave me your name as a good person and a resource to talk to. I called your office, and I'm still not getting anything, you know. So, you know, I don't understand. I just don't understand.
Well, first of all, I appreciate.
And I'm not trying to embarrass you or anything.
I'm not
because
embarrassed.
I know you're busy.
Yeah, I'm not embarrassed at all. I appreciate you raising your concern. You have every right to do so. I don't. Unfortunately, I don't know you personally, so I can't speak to exactly why I wouldn't have returned your call if you called my office. I can tell you that if you spoke to Ms. Henry, she's the person who receives complaints for our office and would be the person that would forward it to the person who will review that before I approve it. So it is very possible that it went through our standard process of reviewing how that works. If someone gave you, I was made aware that someone through a family connection gave my name about something not directly related to the city of Grand Rapids regarding speaking to me. And if that's what this situation is, then that would be separate. And that may be why you didn't get a call back from my office. But I'm here today, so we can talk if you have something, especially if it's related to my work in the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability.
I don't know who Miss Henry is. Claudette never said.
Oh, that's Claudia. Yep, Miss Claudia.
Well,
her last
you
name
know
is Miss Henry.
something. There was another person that I says, well, you know what, you give them a call and, you know, talk to them. They had a situation, and I wasn't thinking anything about Claudette or whatever, but they called and she said the same thing to them, and they were quite offended.
Okay. Well,
Yeah. So,
let's talk after the meeting. You can explain to me what the situation is, and if we can rectify it, I'd be happy to.
well, thank you. You guys have a good one.
We are down to the final 5 minutes. And so we're going to do a little next step summary. I believe everyone up here on the panel, as Brandon just mentioned, they will be available as soon as we close. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to ask those questions directly. So in terms of the sort of summarizing and closing this event, following tonight's discussion, the next steps will be documenting what was heard, reporting that back to city leadership, providing it to the commission for consideration, and then, if approved, policy implementation, equipment use, and data management, as well as the oversight, auditing, and reporting components that you heard in both presentations would take place. I just want to finally close by thanking once again Pastor Bishop for hosting us here at this location. And I'd also like to thank Commissioners Knight, Moody, and Perdue for being present and listening to the questions and comments. And also I want to thank everyone who came to listen as well as share your perspectives, your thoughts, and your comments tonight as well, and the questions. So Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to close for the evening. Thank you.